Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. It's myself, George, joined once more by Charlie, for another entry in the Steven Spielberg Retrospective. And this week, we've arrived at Warhorse, the 2011 historical drama, could we call it, the book adaptation. Of course, directed by Steven Spielberg. That's why we are talking here tonight. But first of all, Charlie, how are we doing today?
Pretty good. Yeah, it's been a good Monday.
No, definitely. We are, of course, pre-recording this, as we like to say in these videos. This video is going up on Tuesday, the 4th of October. We are almost a month ahead. That's how many of these we've got to get in the pan. But at the end of this video, we'll talk about what's coming up on the channel, and that hopefully might make a little bit more sense as to why we're batch recording these so early at the moment. I don't think we were 3 weeks ahead at one point in the year, but we've never been like 4.5 weeks ahead, which is quite insane. So before we get into that sort of stuff, we want to hear from everybody in the comments below. Please do comment your thoughts on Warhorse. Maybe you've read the book, maybe you've seen the play, and you've also seen the film, which is why you'd be on this review. But we know that this is ingrained in British culture. Of course, Michael Morpurgo, one of the most famous British authors, and I think it's a story that a lot of people are familiar with. So we're really excited to hear people's thoughts, and so please do keep the comments coming. And if you're a fan of this video, maybe you like some of the actors in this film. You know, you've got Benedict Cumberbatch, you've got so many others. Cumberbatch is just the first that comes to mind because he's sporting a great moustache. Something I couldn't grow, even though I tried. So yeah, hit that subscribe button if you like this. There's a lot more Spielberg on the way. We are ramping up at the time of recording. We've just had a Fabelmans trailer come out. We've had reactions from Toronto. We've got a poster. We've got stuff on our social media feeds about what to expect over the next few months. Of course, we're not going to be able to cover the Fabelmans upon its launch. We will in the UK. If we're very lucky, we'll have it earlier than the end of January. But we're going to round out this series of Spielberg's top 10. So more details again on the end of that. And if you want to find out about other videos, what's happening on the channel, please do get us on our social medias, Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. And we've got a link to Redbubble in the description below where you can pick up some merch for the channel if you want to help support us. But aside from all of that, Chad, I'm going to put you on this sort of little question. Actually, it's not really that much of a question. Your memories of this film. Maybe you saw it on launch. Maybe you remember it coming out. I'm curious on your backstory with this.
Yeah, I saw it when it was first released at the cinema back, oh God, a million years ago. And yeah, I mean, I've always really loved war films in general. So for me, it was just like exciting to see that. And as a Spielberg fan, as a teenager, I was like, okay, well, we all know how good Saving Private Ryan was. So let's just see how he does with the First World War. And yeah, I loved it. Don't think I was familiar with the story when I first saw the film. And I haven't read it either still, so I'm still not familiar with the original work. But yeah, I loved it. I just remember thinking it was just so great, so different, really like quite humble, quite a small story on such a big scale, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's great fun.
No, very well said. And that kind of, we'll be able to get into the story, into other characters. We've got a lot of really cool background stuff I didn't have the faintest clue about. But I'm kind of the same as you. Before watching this yesterday, I'd only ever seen this film once before. I didn't see it at the cinema, but I do remember this having like massive marketing in England. Of course, again, World War One is a very fascinating war. I think I've said this in other videos. I loved like my modern history at school. I was absorbed in this when I was studying, and World War One's a really interesting one that I've got very strong emotions about why that war started. I won't get into that on this stream certainly at this point in time, but I would go on to say that this is almost a forgotten war outside of Europe. The Americans don't speak about it much. Of course, World War II was more of a human rights war than the traditional sense of why a war began. So it's really interesting to see how few World War One films there are, or shall we say, how few get funded. That's probably the correct term for that. And we'll get into a lot of that across tonight's video. But same as you, saw it once. I really enjoyed it. And I think what's amazing at the time, we'll get to the cast later, some of these actors will go on to be some of the biggest actors of the last decade. It's almost 10 years later we're doing this video for this film, which is just over 10 years, which is kind of quite cool in its own right. But what we'll do, as always, we'll kickstart with the IMDb plot synopsis, as we do for the series. Not too bad this time. It's young Albert enlists to serve in World War One after his beloved horse is sold to the cavalry. Albert's hopeful journey takes him out of England as the front lines as the war rages on. Awkward plot synopsis, because that's trying to tie that the main character isn't the horse. The film is called War Horse.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that? Like, is that a bit of a weird sell?
Well, the book is entirely written from the horse's perspective. It's a first person story, but the person is the horse, which I think when the film first came out, maybe a lot of fans of the book probably stumbled on a little bit, because obviously they maybe expected it to be from Joey's perspective, which obviously it's not. It's much more from, well, it's not even really from Albert's perspective. It's much more broad than that. But yeah, it does kind of, I think maybe it just confused people a bit when it first came out, because it was like, hold on, this isn't the book that we've read. But I'm not sure about that synopsis. It's a little bit vague, but I suppose it kind of says what it does on the tin, you know?
Yeah. I mean, for any massive Albert fans out there, you don't get much of that journey. We get him at the start and end of the film. Although we will get to speak about Jeremy Irvine, of course, with that. But it is an interesting one. It's probably the weirdest synopsis we've had, bar the Last Crusade having every single full long title for Indiana Jones characters, followed by their nickname in the middle, followed by Junior, Senior. And that was a mouthful. Luckily, we've not got any more Indiana Jones films to do on the series. Plug Kingdom of the Crystal Skull from, that would have been 2 weeks ago now, for that review. That was interesting. But what we'll do, I know you're a fan of it, and that's what I only found this out after. We're recording this after D23. We've had the conversation on the stream. But you've also just finished your dissertation, which is amazing. Everyone's very happy for you. So congratulations. We'll say it whilst we're on the stream. What we'll do, we've spoke about our memories of this. We've both said we've not read the book or seen the play. And you might be thinking, why do they keep bringing the play up? Well, it turns out the play is probably the most important thing to this film being made after the book. And what we'll do, we'll kickstart. We spoke about Michael Morpurgo. Again, British Stormer. I would actually be really close. I think this is an author that Americans probably haven't heard of. I'm not disrespecting or insulting anyone's intelligence over there. I think there are authors, it's almost like comedy. There are some stand-ups that are massive in the UK that can't make it in America. There are some in America that can't make it in the UK, and you get the odd name that can do both countries. And it's very rarely one can do both. And I think that's the key to comedy. And I feel we have that with certainly fictional work. And Michael Morpurgo's is very like British, not to the Roald Dahl sense. We'll get to talk about Roald Dahl about what's coming up on the channel. But Michael Morpurgo is one that I think, you know, when you're at school, it's one of, you'd end up reading one of his books. There's himself, of course, Roald Dahl ones. Of course, we always have to read Mice and Men, Shakespeare. But it's interesting that I had never read this, hadn't been made to read it. I think we have it at home somewhere. We've got a lot of books. We grew up reading books. But it's really interesting that I've not read this. And listen, some people might be thinking, why are you doing this video without reading it? If I'd been reading every book before this Spielberg series started, I'd probably still be like at the opening third on like The Color Purple or something, because almost everything has book adaptations. And what really surprised me with this one is that Michael Morpurgo himself was co-writing a screenplay. He had a producer working with him on it. This is like the early noughties, and they just couldn't get it produced. No one would touch it. It was all missing, like, I don't know what you'd call it, adaptation purgatory. It's not like The Blacklist where, you know, people can pick up gems on there and, you know, rewrite them down the line. But this was nothing was happening. And instead, a stage play launched in 2007. This actually surprised me. I didn't know this. I thought the play was after the film because of how well the film did.
No.
But the play came out first, and we'll get to speak Kathleen Kennedy. We'll get to speak about it. We'll give her own segment very shortly. But she went with her husband to watch it. Frank Marshall, you might have heard of him, also another very, very successful producer. This is 2 years after it came out, 2009. And they went with their family. They were all completely taken aback by the idea. And they then obviously enjoyed it so much, they looked into the film rights, and it came out that nobody had ever purchased the film rights. So before we sort of get past that point, I'm going to sort of put you on the spot and ask you a question. Does that validate the whole British authors that might not be that big in America? Because I am very surprised that this wasn't snapped up in the 90s or early noughties. The fact that no studio had the rights for this film is genuinely one of the most baffling things I've thought of today.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking, really. I think it's probably also to do with the fact that it's not only is he a British author, but it's a very British story. And like you say, the World War Two is the glamorous war. You know, I mean, it wasn't glamorous, but what I mean is it's much easier to tell the story of World War Two. World War One is the grubby kind of let's not talk about it. Probably should never have happened. Like less sort of marketable war, and Warhorse particularly focuses so heavily on the British side of things. So I think maybe that has a lot to do with it as well. And actually, the only other characters that we get throughout the film are French and German. So it's sort of like very home territory kind of focus. So I'm guessing that probably has got a big part to do with it. And also the fact that it was adapted to stage first maybe made a lot of film production companies go, why do we don't need to make this into a film? It's already massive on stage. So I don't know. There's probably a lot of elements to why that was the case, but it's a good job Kathleen Kennedy went to watch it, really.
Yeah, and there'll be some people crying, saying that she's not the reason there's ever been a successful Steven Spielberg film. Yeah, I know you missed the ET video, which was the first one we got to really get into it properly. We did a little bit on Raiders, but you know, we're coming up to Lincoln soon, which is the last Kathleen Kennedy Spielberg film. 10 years ago now, 10 years since Lucasfilm was purchased, of course, being made president. But actually, I don't think we've been able to have you on one of the Kathleen Kennedy discussions. Just quickly, I know you're a massive fan of her, so I know you've met her. Just for anyone curious at home, like, I know you're a fan of her, but just let the people know. And, you know, not to put you on the spot and say, like, she's great, but because I know she means a lot to you as well.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get gushy, but she's like like the woman in film. You know, she's done so much, and with the support of a lot of men around her, but she has really just achieved the thing that so many women, especially in the 70s, would have been told you would never achieve that. You know, it's a man's world, especially Hollywood. And I just think she's incredible, and I think there's a lot of emotion and a lot of passion into everything she does. I think she probably fights a lot for getting female character stories told, particularly in Star Wars, which I know a lot of people don't like, but those people are not welcome here. I just love her. I think she's my hero.
No, it's fair, and it's great to hear as well, because people do need to hear this. This isn't what other channels would do. Other channels would scream and cry, and you know, as we kind of say, claim wasn't her sis, but for her to be sat there with her family, and also, I'm going to just say this as well. Frank Marshall is a very successful producer as well. Not as successful as Kathleen Kennedy. I think she's like the third or fourth, if you were looking at it in terms of box office, third or fourth most successful producer ever, which is obviously after Feige, you know, who has like 30 billion for the same franchise, and then Spielberg, I think, is like a number 2 type thing. But her impact on them, and even Spielberg's own career, he said it in many interviews. She came on board in Raiders. She was an production assistant, and she just completely blew them away. What she was capable of, what she was talking to them about story. Considering contextually, in 1981, you know, she's talking to George Lucas, the guy that did Star Wars and Empire. Steven Spielberg, the guy that did Jaws and Close Encounters. And she was blowing them away on set to then, you know, E.T. the follow-up film. Now she's the producer, and she's stayed in that producer role with him for, you know, 40 years. 40 years by the time you get to Lincoln, which is remarkable. And again, credit needs to be given. And even, I know you've got a background in musical theatre as well, but, you know, from what I've heard from my role when we used to work in casting and stuff, so much of casting was people just sat in theatres all day watching for talent, keeping out, watching the same shows. But for a producer on a whim to go to obviously this isn't a musical, but to go to a stage play and just instantly be taken aback by it. And also, Frank Marshall didn't end up with the rights to this either. I'm just going to say that. It wasn't Frank Marshall that had the rights. She got Spielberg to get the rights for DreamWorks. And I think that's a very telling part of the story too. I just think it's amazing. And it's one of those few stories that, you know what, I'm glad it wasn't, oh, this book's big, it's been sat in development hell for 20, 30 years, no one will touch it, but someone's going to do it eventually. I love the fact it was something as innocent as taking your family to the theatre for the day, also in London, not the New York version, and then then turning it out into a film of this quality. I think that's probably one of my favorite behind the scenes, like how a film's come to be of this entire series so far.
Yeah,
because it feels like a very, not a British thing, but there's something British about the way that's happened, isn't there? And we'll
It's very
speak
organic.
a lot about organic's the best word, and we'll speak a lot about filming later on as well. That this is almost just a British production with an American director. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But there's no, let's put some Americans in, let's get big names in and have them do British accents. It's very authentic.
Yeah.
And I think that's also quite rare. And again, we know that Spielberg is the king of doing that. Just look at, obviously, for comparisons in terms of backgrounds of characters, Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's Lists, when there are backgrounds, certain people he wants to cast in the roles, he will do that, whether it's religion, whether it's story, whether it's the country they're from. It's very important to his work. And we're going to move into some of the Spielberg stuff of this. So she saw it in 2009. She convinced Spielberg to purchase the rights. This was in December 2009. And at this point in time, he was only there to purchase the rights. He would go on to see the play in March 2010. He enjoyed it so much, he met the entire... I mean, imagine working at a theatre and it's like, by the way, Steven Spielberg said he wants to meet you all because he loved it.
Chances are, I hope at least, that the cast weren't told until after the show.
Yeah. And that's it. And it's one of those stories where it's so lovely. And this is the thing, the part of the most. His intentions were to be a producer on the film, to produce it under the Amblin banner. And because Tintin was so far into post-production, he was basically on hiatus. He had nothing to do with Peter Jackson covering the rest of it. He just decided, I actually love this so much, I'm going to direct this film. So in May, he was cast, 2010. May 2010, he was cast, and this is what's really surprised me. He had his full... Sorry, he wasn't cast. Sorry, he became director in May 2010. He had a full cast by June. That's like... when you talk about director's turnover, that's like a month. Like...
That's insane.
And also, speaking of that casting, you've got the likes of like Cumberbatch, you've got David Thewlis, you've got Tom Hiddleston. There's so many big names in this. And even I think small names that people aren't familiar with that would have been the turn of their career. It's fascinating how quickly this film took place. But what I kind of want to jump to is, have you ever like heard stories like that before? That, again, I'm trying to think of a successful book adaptation. This is now within a year of Kathleen Kennedy going to watch a play to a full cast being confirmed on a British film production directed by Steven Spielberg. That's to me is unparalleled.
I mean, coming from someone that works in casting, I can tell you that a month turnaround on a full cast of a feature-length film is just unheard of. Like, it's a long process. It takes that long to just get the list of people together to come in and read for the parts, let alone actually get them signing contracts and all of the stuff that comes with agreeing to the role. It's insane. No, I can't think of any other example where it turns around that quickly.
No, exactly. And anyone commenting at home, it might be smart. Please comment it if you think, there was one that was this. But again, for a film of this scale, this prestige, I'm just going to say it, prestigious. We don't throw around too much. It's a Steven Spielberg film. It's you look at the posters and you can tell it's a Spielberg film. But just a few more bit of behind the scenes before we get into the direction side of it. So Richard Curtis also came on board, which surprised me.
That actually, I mean, I think I maybe knew that, but somewhere in the back of my brain. And then when the credits rolled at the end, I was like, oh, Richard Curtis was involved in writing. That's really cool. Like, what a British legend when it comes to filmmaking. Yeah,
and the fact he had to be convinced as well, which again, that's I'm not just being tapped at by Hollywood. This was probably a conscious, I'm going to write this story, like there's going to have to be some, not in it for me, but I'd imagine it was a very, well, from all the behind the scenes I've been reading, it went very well. And Spielberg signed on after reading his first draft. He wrote multiple versions of the film, of the same drafts, because again, this is a point of view story from the horse. As I mentioned, I'm not familiar with the complete source material. I know there'll be a Spielberg film that is based off a book towards the end of this series, but I'll have you on for we'll be able to talk about. But Spielberg's done it before, he will take the bits he likes from books. He might change a few things. He might ask them to do this and that. But I think for Richard Curtis to be involved in this was a very important point. And even moving into the filming side of it, this entire film was shot in the UK, all in British countrysides, which I'm not really a country type person, but there's a nice, you're doing this World War One. It was all fields. It wasn't, there's some cities of sorts, but it was mainly fighting in the trenches. This doesn't need to go to France to go to vintage cities to do like Dunkirk. This just needs to be in the country. and I think they nailed it. And on the locations they do go to, you know, when we've got the farms, we've got the manors, I think they all look stunning. And a lot of that came from the scouting recce's. Kathleen Kennedy was involved in the scouting recs, and they ended up shooting a lot of them. And again, it's a Spielberg film. That production flew by. An even more insane point, there were 3 shots of VFX this entire film, and they each lasted 3 seconds. And they said the only reason they were visual effects is because it was to protect the horses, because it was something they couldn't physically do with a horse, or an animatronic horse. And obviously, you know, no one wants a dead horse on a film, so let's just say it.
Especially not on this film.
Yeah, could you imagine the PR like, oh yeah, they're doing this war horse film, and they're actually like shooting them? Probably in the 70s they might have tried it, maybe.
Yeah,
but
maybe.
Definitely not now.
Let's think back to Godfather.
Yeah, I think that was a real horse's head.
It definitely was.
But it's again, like behind the scenes, it's just amazing for this, and it feels like a proper, as you mentioned, like an organic thing. And moving into the Spielberg side of it for his actual direction, we mentioned earlier, this is his first World War I film, and that it surprised me, but it didn't. I think because, as you mentioned, like World War II is the more glamorous for a film producer standpoint. That it's obviously it's not modern now, but it's machine guns, handheld, tank combat, airplanes, parachutes. Look at video games and all that sort of stuff, and that was a lot of that was down to Saving Private Ryan and what his films have done for the war genre. World War One is, as we mentioned, it's a very tricky thing, and I had this written into the schedule. I'm going to bring it up now. This was the highest-grossing World War One film until Wonder Woman. Now I can only.
The fact that Wonder Woman is classed as a World War One film, that really hurts me.
I wasn't a big fan of the scene as well. I know everyone else loves that part, but to me that was the history nerd in school at me. Like, no, like you wouldn't let one person. It's really sad, but you know that guy that's on like cinema scenes that's like a bellend, and I was just there like, well, if I was a German sniper, we can't kill her. Let's just get everyone that's running behind her. Childish, petty, fine, but I always had that weird vibe. But World War One films, I'm just going to list a couple in my head that I think have come since then. We've got 1917.
The obvious, yeah.
The King's Man, not Kingsman, The King's Man.
Yeah, again.
It is World War to a point, but not really World War One.
Yeah.
And of course this, and a Daniel Radcliffe film, which I've still not seen, where he played, I think, Kipling's son. It was like My Boy Jack. Which I've had that on DVD for about 10 years, you know. I think my history teacher at school gave it to me, which is really weird. I probably should have given it back. But I've never seen it still. But again, as you said, like World War I, I don't want to say like a forgotten war, but it's just, as you kind of said, it's not, certainly for Americans, it's not.
And there's not many films that really focus on the combat of World War One. It's a lot more about like the life back home. You know, there's Their Finest, and there's the, I'm going to get the title of this wrong, the Guernsey Literary Potato Pie Society. It's got such a long title. You know, they all focus much more on sort of like what was going on here whilst it was happening, rather than the actual combat. I mean, there's a lot of older films that focus on like the Somme and the trenches and things, but for films like this, there's just not really a huge pool of choice. I think 1917 is the one that springs to mind for most people, I would imagine. There was another one a few years ago called
I'd say They Shall Not Grow Old. I know it's a documentary, so I don't know how people, but if you haven't seen that, by the way, do watch that. That's probably one of the most important documentaries in modern history. If I'm just going to say that on a video. Again, Peter Jackson, we spoke about him a lot to plug the Tintin video, how I went into this tangent that he's like a modern George Lucas. He's a pioneer of behind the scenes technology. He's as, I don't say as bothered about directing, but his strengths to me are in the behind the scenes pushing technologies forward. And that documentary is like the must watch. And I remember when the centenary, when that came out, that was massive. That was like viewed at schools. That was everywhere. And I recommend it to anyone that hasn't seen it. Sorry, I know I'll cut you off.
It's okay. Yeah, no, I was just going to say there is another one that came out, which is also an adaptation of a play called Journey's End, which also had a very big British cast. Asa Butterfield, Sam Claflin. It's got quite a lot of nice, fairly well-known actors in it. But again, just not to the scale, not even close.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really does sort of stand alone in that sort of sense.
And I think kind of stemming into his actual direction, this, I mean, when we began this series, it's amazing because we get to see the rise of this incredible director, to me, the greatest director of all time. And I said that a lot. You hit the 90s where I hate using terms like at his peak because that sort of makes it out like he reached the top and he dropped off after, which he definitely he hasn't done. That's
No.
that's not even past tense. He didn't drop. He's still there.
He's still going.
To me, it's almost this like John Williams section now where it's like it's so hard to speak about the quality of the work he does because I just think it is unparalleled that I will view a Steven Spielberg film in a different lens to any director. I will view a Christopher Nolan film in a different lens to any director. That, to me, the only comparison is amongst themselves because they stand alone. Yeah. And that's a very weird thing to say, but I'm just going to try and like say my thoughts out of this. That this is somebody that he's took a horse that can't speak because it's not an animated film. He's made it the lead character in a film set in World War I, where it has about 5-6 different owners, storylines, subplots, whatever. And I feel the horse has genuinely given a performance.
Yeah,
I know that sounds really stupid, but like,
that just screams how incredible the direction is because obviously the horse is not acting. The horse is just being a horse and doing what its trainer is telling it to do. But the fact that every single scene, every single moment is built up around the emotion that horse is supposed to be feeling in each moment, like that setup, that vision of it is just, I love this film.
Yeah. No, and this is it, and I think that's what's sort of striking. Again, this is the second time I've seen this film. The first time I didn't know what to expect. Was it going to be a World War film that just had someone riding a horse for 2 hours? But I never expected a story from the perspective of the horse, and I think that's what sort of blew me away all those years ago. So coming back to it now, where I knew it's the point of view horse film, not just to generalize it, not to sort of like knock it down for being that. I was able to take in so much more of the story, the performances, the characters around it, and it's kind of what you said. It's the focus on what happened back home, and with World War One, going some of the history stuff again, like it is a monstrosity of a war that, it was all for nothing. And I'll leave it at that because I don't want to get into the politics of how that war started. I've done that enough, and it's not the time for it. But it's to see the horrors of war from the perspective of an animal hasn't been done. And what sort of is striking with me is that I think there's this incredible statistic that I think 1 million horses were sent over for that war, and I'm pretty sure about like 60,000 returned. And if people didn't know some of this stuff, like some of the horses, obviously were killed in combat, as this film does. They were sort of used for strength, for muscle. Some in the cavalry, and what's always sort of freaked me out is that some were used for meat when the soldiers needed them to. That's something people don't speak about, and people argue that what you've got to do in war, and I completely understand that. And obviously, just if anyone is watching this, trying to talk about things being disgusting, they're literally living in a trench. Do some research before you talk about what they're going to be eating in a trench. Sorry, I just want to get that way before someone cries and starts talking about other stuff, but. I'm just sort of taking this film in still. It's been a day, and going back to his direction, I'm just going to sort of ask you the same question in a weird way. Like, do you think any other director could have done this film justice the way this has been done? Because I'm honestly struggling. I think so many directors would go down the route of CGI. And that's not even today. God. 2011, I think people would have tried CGI for a film like this. And I just think that by us knowing it's real, the actors around it who are obviously acting with the horse, they're there on set. It's not just a green polo ball to say, look, there's a horse here. I feel that everybody is involved, and as you kind of mentioned, this all comes down to the direction. And I want to give a shout out to the cinematographer who's been on every Spielberg film since since Schindler's List, which is Janusz Kaminski, who is a mighty reason of why his films look as beautiful as they do. The lighting in this, like, again, to make World War I, which is a pretty disgusting war. Again, it's trench warfare, gas bombs. We see a lot of that. It's visually stunning in this, and I think that is as important as the story itself. That had it looked bleak and meager, I don't think you'd be able to take in what you're watching. Whereas images like the countryside, all that sort of stuff, it looks beautiful because it's been shot that way. And I just think the cinematography really stands out to me compared to some of the other work.
Yeah, and I think as I watching it now, 11 years later, and knowing, I've studied film a lot in that time, picking up on things like the position of the lighting and the scenery and the scope of these shots. Just to me, it kind of has a feel of something that was made, could have been made in like the 50s, the 40s even. Like it's got a real something really earnest about it, and something really like wholesome and really quite believable that it is set when it's set. And that to me all comes down to the composition and the setup and the vision that the cinematographer and the director had together. And I think things like the final scene where it's almost a silhouette with a bright orange background of the sunset could be seen as quite cheesy, but because of the nature of the film and because of the sort of the price that all these characters are willing to pay, or a lot of them didn't have a choice to pay, kind of reflect in that overall image. And it really is stunning, and a lot of it is very dark, like color wise. It's night shoots and lots of terrible weather and lots of mud and all that kind of stuff, but it still somehow still looks really beautiful.
And you don't ever lose sight of what's going on. It's never so, not to compare it to
so
sort of
dark
Game of
that you
Thrones.
can't tell what's going on.
Yeah, and I think there's a really borderline of films that do that from a stylistic perspective. Some not to make digs at Snyder Cut and stuff, but it's like, let's make it dark, and it's just literally.
It's definitely a theme at the moment. Like there are some. Even, obviously, I'm a huge Marvel fan, but I even tried to watch Eternals the other day.
It's like drained color palettes.
I was watching it in daylight, and I was like, I'm just gonna have to turn this off. I literally cannot see what's on the screen. There is no point me watching this. And it's definitely like a trend at the moment to make things so hard to see that you have to use your imagination. It's just ridiculous.
And it never falls into it, which is a sort of a perfect thing with this. But we talk about some of the characters because the story sort of merges. We mentioned its point of view of the horse, but the journey is as important. I think, if you don't have the correct journey for the character, you're not going to have that same finale, the big momentous moments. And obviously, it kicks out with Albert, played by Jeremy Irvine, with his family on a farm. Well, they don't really adopt it; they purchase it, and we've got Peter Mullen, who plays Dad Ted. Who I mainly know him from Harry Potter. I'm just going to say I've not actually seen a lot of his stuff, and this is what I kind of. And this is really weird because it's sort of a criticism myself, I guess. But Spielberg comes on board, and even on these minor supporting roles, is that a polite term? Because he's like a supporting role in one of the smaller segments, and it's still British actors, and it's not here's a massive name that's going to cameo for a scene, and I'll reiterate that when we get to the big names later because they're deemed the big names because of the success that's come since. And I just loved the storyline that just it begins because he's pissed off at his landlord, played by again David Thewlis, another Harry Potter alumni, who is I genuinely believe one of the most underrated British actors. I know in the last couple of years he started to. I feel his films have gone more not mainstream in America, but we're seeing some of his smaller roles pick up. We're seeing him in more things, but a proper British stalwart actor, especially from the 90s when he was younger. I love him in this, and I think this is where I kind of come in with like British productions. Now, this is a really weird thing to say. British people just suit period films better. I know that I'm not there to insult any people that do look like they're from period pieces from the States, but there's something about Daniel Day-Lewis ends up playing Lincoln in his next film, spoiler alert. He isn't afraid, and I just feel that no one is cast wrong, but if we stick to the first one to begin with, of course, I guess it kind of covers the ending in a weird way. How do we feel with Albert and the whole subplot that he's raised this horse and he's had to see it get sold to the army, and he's on his quest to get it back. I kind of love this, and I think the reason why it also works so well is that we're not with Albert for the entire film, contrary to IMDb's beliefs.
I don't think IMDb have actually seen the film. Yeah, I think Jeremy Irvine's great. I think he was really well cast. I'm not sure if it's a authentic accent. I'm not sure where he's actually originally from. I actually think he's a really good actor, and I think it's a shame we've not seen more of him since. I know he's been in things, but I mean, like, it would be nice to see him at the forefront of something again. And you'll have to remind me of her surname, but the actress that plays his mum, Emily
Watson.
I just think she's brilliant. She's another one of those actresses who pops up in so many British productions, and I really think she's fantastic. And I think there's very minimal female presence in this film, and I think she kind of like grounds that quite well. Yeah, I really like the opening scenes. Actually, my favorite moment from the whole film, which I won't reveal until the end, is in this sort of like opening segment when they're still at the farm, and I think it's really well done. And it's David Thewlis is brilliant in this. I think he plays a good villain. Is he the villain? I don't know, but he's kind of got villainous an attitude
He's
about
got a
him,
twirling moustache that is their landlord, like the ultimate. You know,
he's like like most landlords, really.
Yeah. It's the whole like, oh, how dare you outbid me? Now I'm just going to make sure you actually pay your rent. Like, that's such a
and
weird.
It's the moment where he has someone to hold his umbrella for him, and it's just like, oh, who does this guy think he is? Like, but yeah, he's very good in it. I do like
what
that
you
sort
need.
of opening scene. It's very powerful.
You need to set up, this story of why is this horse special, and the fact they bought it for plow farming, and it's a different. I'm not a horse expert, sorry, but it's like a different breed of horse, and then it's able to eventually learn how to do the farming, which has a massive moment for it later on in the film when it gets to the artillery stuff. But it's such an innocent thing, and I think what this film does, and this is in almost every sort of character arc with the humans we're going to follow after, it really does show like I say the horrors of war. For this, it's something as simple as an owner being taken away from his horse, and now you like myself, you've had pets. Do horses classify as pets? I've never really understood what the
probably depends who you ask.
Yeah, like to some it's like it's my colleague that'll help me when I'm working.
Yeah.
It's when you see them, you see them grow up. I couldn't possibly imagine it being not just taken away from me. This is going over, and obviously we're sat here in 2022. We know that this war would go on for 4 years. That this would, the Great War deemed at the time. But we know that most of those horses don't come back. For the unknown of the young person to know that, to want to sign up and join the war, and the boys laugh at when Tom Hiddleston says, your league's not old enough, and the story at the time is that everyone would just go around the block, come back, and say, "I'm 16." They still get signed up. It was such a we'll be back by Christmas, guys, type thing. And it's really
it'll be fun.
And it's fascinating and sort of devastating at the same time. And I think it's the separation that makes this so important. And again, the characters that we are presented to, because merging into the next story with Tom Hiddleston playing Captain Nichols, he's the suave captain who looks amazing. It's Tom Hiddleston. Again, British actors look better in period pieces. I'm just going to keep saying it. And because he is this lovely character, he has genuine intentions for the horse. He's genuinely caring for the horse. He's, everything's going to be all right here. And then so comes the machine guns. I know that's jumping ahead. But it's that point of the film that you need to see the horrors of war to really kickstart the story. And there's something, I don't want to call it a Game of Thrones because this was before Game of Thrones, kind of. We can look at it again in 2022 and see that's Tom Hiddleston. He'll be around to the end of the film. At this point in time, he's an emerging young British actor. He'd just been in Thor. It wasn't, he's had this massive role a couple of years ago. He's on the big up. He had just been in Thor. And, I wouldn't say he probably got big, if I'm being honest, till, maybe, what would you say? After
Avengers, I would say.
Avengers, it took a couple of years for it to really kickstart. I know you've seen him in theatre. Did he do Wolf Hall? I feel like he did one of the British dramas, which was massive.
The Night Manager, which was really big. Yeah.
How? I mean, I haven't let you speak, it was very rude, but how do you feel about like Captain Nichols? Because it's such a tragic character, and I think that also goes to show I don't want to say horrors of war again, but it was
Yeah, but it's true.
it was these young kids that were sent off to go galloping in the fields.
And who were instilled with this level of confidence that, oh, we're the British, we'll be fine, you know, like it's that kind of almost ignorance. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem fair to call them that, but you know, and I think what I really like about his character is, yeah, he does come across as this like smarmy captain, and look at me, I'm rich, and look at me, I'm higher ranked than you. But he still takes the time to write to Albert and to send him drawings of Joey, and to kind of, he's still very appreciative of, you know, and very aware of the sacrifices that people are making. And I actually think it's such a shame that his character doesn't survive longer, because I think obviously that's the nature of the story, is to see the journey that Joey goes on. But I think he's quite an in-depth character, really, when they could have just written this asshole captain.
Yeah.
But they, you know, he's actually written with so much emotion and personality, and yeah, he's great. And Tom Hiddleston's great. He's almost made for roles like this.
The death scene, I mean, everyone wants to be at the death scene, so without getting into the history side of it too much, one of the fascinating things of World War One, it's like the in-between from the 19th century of cavalry charges, you know, what would you call the old rifles, or like against a B, I can't remember.
Like Revolutionary Wars.
Yeah, and World War One's this technological growth where, you know, the tank is invented during that war, and pretty much everyone that drove a tank in World War One died in it, or very, very soon after, due to poisoning. And I think the scene of the cavalry is one of the best directed scenes in this film. There's a lot of great directed scenes, but even like, because it sets up the whole, oh, here come the British, they're destroying them, they're going to win, look at them. And I think Spielberg actually consciously said he didn't want any blood, he didn't want it to be like Saving Private Ryan. He was very important. This one was rated 12A. Obviously, it would have been like PG-13 in America, so there's no blood when, you know, the swords going up them. And the moment those machine guns come out the bushes, and I think I was reading some behind the scenes that Tom Hiddleston said that Spielberg told him, like, when we shoot your death scene, I want you to go from being a 30-year-old to a 9-year-old. And when I kind of read that, amazing, because you look at sort of Tom Hiddleston's face in the death scene, and what's beautiful is they don't show it. You know, we have him on the horse, we have the close-up, we have the machine gun, the smoking, and then just the horse. And I think
to me just encapsulates just such phenomenal direction, and you can just tell that he is so comfortable working with actors, and why actors love working with him, because everyone, even if you're not a performer, you know exactly what that means. You go from being a 30-year-old captain to being a 9-year-old child, and you can just, I mean, that's incredible. This is so to the point, and it's create your own baggage, create your own emotion from that. But this is what we need to capture in this scene. I mean, that's just such brilliant direction. I mean, not that we need to go on about how good a director Spielberg is. It's pretty obvious, really.
But that's the kind of ground that comes with it. Again, you've got young. I mean, we speak about a lot in this series. You've been on some episodes as well. You know, when Spielberg's got young actors, you know, certainly child actors, I think he's the best director in the world with them. And again, this case, we've got British actors. I'm gonna go out on a limb. I might have got this wrong. I don't think any of these actors have been in a Spielberg film before. There could be a minor character somewhere that has, but we've not even got like usual suspects coming back into the next Y and Z films with. It's almost a new cast for him, and he still gets fantastic performances. And I really want to quickly, whilst we're on the cavalry, got to talk Benedict Cumberbatch as Major Stewart again. I love Ben. I think everyone loves Benedict Cumberbatch at this point in time. I feel that he's genuinely just one of the most like brilliant actors of that time. And brilliant sounds like a really weird, like I'd emphasized it. Just take his acting aside, him as a person, him as a human being. He is a phenomenal individual, and also he's so respectful, and I absolutely love him. Every time I see him in interviews, he's polite, he's delicate, he's intelligent. I know a lot of people, and a lot of people laugh at, oh, look, it's like, you know, the private school, like the Eton actors, you know, him, Hiddleston, and a lot of the British up and comers from that time, which I think is a little bit unfair for all of them. But again, it's a World War I film. He just looks like he would be a captain. A major. He's got the mustache. I think they had to grow them back. I think back then, like, and that's it. Like, I think in World War One, if you were a captain above, you had to actually grow facial hair, which is a really interesting thing. And again, you put him in that costume and he just fits it. And Cumberbatch is in so many period films over his career already. I think
It's
what I love
actually
about him.
surprising that we don't have Eddie Redmayne in this one as well.
Well,
know?
are you ready for this?
Oh, enlighten me.
Eddie Redmayne was almost Albert.
Do you know, I was literally just thinking, I'm surprised. I'm really surprised that he isn't, to be honest.
He's like, if you'd have had him, you'd have had like the Deathly Hallows of like the Eton boy actors. Not in a disrespectful term, but so he auditioned for Albert, but it went to Jeremy Irvine. And it was quite curious. I should have done my research.
I wonder if it came down to who could do the best Devonshire accent.
That's what part of me is thinking. I wonder if it's the accent, because
it's not an easy accent to get right.
I think Eddie Redmayne would be great at the sort of quiet mumbling, let me pet this horse, fantastic beats and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, he isn't. He's the one that, and I'm curious of Eddie Redmayne again. I should have read it, but I can't remember. Like, what was his breakthrough film? Like,
Theory of Everything, I guess.
And what was that? 2014. I want to.
I mean, he did other things before that, like Jupiter Ascending.
Yeah, that was held out especially for his Oscar year. But Eddie Redmayne, I think, is the one. I think, without being disrespectful, because I actually quite like Eddie Redmayne, but I don't think he'd have been appropriate for Albert. Maybe one of the other characters.
Yeah,
but
maybe.
Almost the fact that it's just amazing. The fact that like it's the one name you'd guess could have been in it, and then he was almost is amazing. And I guess what we can say with the cavalry stuff following that. Joey goes to the controls of the two German brothers. I don't have too much to say on this. If I'm being honest, we're just going to go through the key horse moments. But again, if you want to talk about some of the horrors of war, it's a brother trying to protect his own from being drafted to going over the wall, and they do try and desert and are obviously caught by the Germans and have to be killed for desertion. It's always I've always said, whatever film it is, whatever real life story you read, the concept of shooting squads on deserters, I understand. I've always understood the concepts, but it just, even though this isn't real, this is fictional. It just never makes it easier when like you see reasoning. And what I've always imagined is that so many officers, so many people serving, so many people on their shooting squads, they also do understand. And it's, I mean, even the shot of when the windmills going around when they kill them. Like, you don't actually see the bodies, which is, I think, just expertly shot in a polite way. But how do you feel with that? It's like a mini 5-minute storyline, isn't it? But again, it's Joey getting another owner that leads to sort of dire consequences.
Yeah, and I think it is just like a way to show the reality of the situation from both sides as well. I really like that it focuses on the British army, and then it focuses on the German army, and then it also focuses on those that are just victims of their land being taken. They're not really directly involved in the war, but they are there and they're casualties of it regardless. And I think, it's not a huge time-wise, it's not a huge section of the story, but it's a very vital part. It really showcases the level of sacrifice that so many people did, had to do in that situation. And passes Joey on to the next owner, which is obviously like the main purpose.
Yeah, and we've got the grandfather and Emily, which is this is one of the more interesting ones because you watch it and okay, of course it's going to go to a kid. Not in a disrespectful term, but obviously it's when you get to the end of the film is the importance of why we've spent time with them, why it means so much to them, why it means so much to him. And again, I want to use another phrase for the the horrors of war. I'm bored of saying horrors of war. I'm just going to try and find something else to use. But their story arc has to get in because we find out via, we don't need to know why or how. Of course, she was killed at some point in this war, following on from losing the horse. With it being farmers in Europe in World War One, just caught in the crossfires type thing. It would have become trenches, all that sort of stuff. Again, I don't want to get into being like a history nerd and stuff. And it is devastating that innocent people's lives are taken. And I just think there's something about getting away from the army, even if it's for 5-10 minutes. It really gives sort of Joe that character back. That I think if it was just him going from soldier to soldier to soldier, you'd lose sight of the sort of humanitarian that comes with it. And the fact that we have these two caring people that do care for us is the fact they hide them in in the bedroom during the pots and all the army coming in to take what they want stuff. I think that's a very powerful scene because again, that happened in that war. It's happened in many wars. It still happens today. And I thought it was a really interesting way for Spielberg to dive into that. And obviously, what I don't know is this is something from the book. I would assume it is because it comes full cycle in. But how do you feel with that sort of smaller subplot before we go back to the army type stuff?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most powerful parts of the film for me. I think it kind of just kind of reiterates the people that were caught up in what was happening when they were just simply trying to survive and live their lives. They weren't involved in combat. They weren't involved in any of the fighting as such, but they were just trying to survive what was happening. And I think the grandfather, the actor who plays the grandfather, is probably for me the most impressive performance in the whole film. I think his ability to just be so incredibly natural throughout his whole part of it is just perfect. And I really love the kind of the softer touches of this story. So the moment when Emily is trying to teach Joey how to show jump, but he doesn't jump over his hurdle, he follows her as she steps over hers, and it's kind of the innocence and the quieter moments come from this plot point. And I think the film needs it, especially because Warhorse as a book is a children's book. Michael Morpurgo is a child's author, so I think it kind of just hones back in on the sort of origin of what this story is and where it comes from.
Yeah, it's really well said that, and especially as you said, ultimately it's a children's book, and now I kind of said that like it's really stupid for me not to sort of jump off, but we sort of mentioned it, they didn't want to burden this. This was primarily made for the younger audience, and I think really just jumping on some like not behind the scenes, but just my honest thoughts. I'm surprised this isn't something we watched at school. I mean, obviously, I'd have been in year 11 when this came out, so as in my final few months, I'd be very surprised this didn't become part of teaching as the years went by, because
his books definitely are part of the curriculum, and or at least they were. I don't know if they still are. I assume so, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was one that was, encouraged.
Yeah, definitely, and kind of moving from the farm, we'll just get to the final line. So we've got Private Hengelman, who is the German artillery sort of officer that's assigned to look after the horses. This is like a devastating scene. So this is what I kind of like. Again, I'm not sort of sloppy with war films, but when we lose the other horse, which is like I didn't cry or anything. There's this moment where they I know I'm jumping ahead, they obviously kill it. It's how all the other horses like react to the gunshot, and I think it's always moments like that sort of take you off guard. That this sounds really strange in a video, but to a horse, they probably know a gunshot is how these horses have been with them carrying this artillery for ages. They probably know every time an artillery goes off, a shot goes off, they know that there's a horse not coming back. And people might look at that weird, but they're intelligent animals.
Oh, incredibly.
And this is what's always like amazed me, and going to this film again is Joe almost has like a hero's moment when he like volunteers to go as tribute, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And it's those moments I spoke about earlier that it's like the horses are fully fledged characters performing, and as you said, it's the training, it's how they've trained the horses. I think they had 16 horses that played Joey, which is incredible.
Yeah.
I think they might have temporarily like changed the hair on the horses, the colors of them to make it look like
the white diamond was like a wig.
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's like special like dye, like horsehair dye that's probably it would be, if it's on this set, it would have been fine.
Of course, yeah.
But the whole final act, and this is what's sort of beautiful, again, getting into that sort of war side of it, we get the lead up of Joe being stuck in no man's land in all the barbed wire, and the moment where the two soldiers come together on no man's land, they put aside their differences for the comfort of the creature, and these are the things that get me. So everyone's familiar with the football game on 1914. If you didn't see the Sainsbury's advert, I'm very surprised by now. If you haven't, go watch it. It's like the greatest urban myth in history, because it definitely did happen. And obviously, if you don't know, on Christmas Day they had a kick around, and the next day, obviously, they went back to shooting each other in the trench. I think this scene sort of took on that identity in its own way.
Yeah.
It was more of a love and respect for this poor animal that they have to work together to save it. And again, for a film that's showed you the low points of humanity, that showed you the dangers that this war did not just for innocent people, but for animals, creatures, for land, for farmers, to everything. It's this moment that I think I don't have like a smile on my face as such, but it's like this is the stuff I really enjoy. That you've got these two soldiers, they don't know each other, they've got no reason to dislike each other other than the fact that they are at the opposing end of a war. But as individuals, they obviously learn to respect one another immediately, and it's that stereotypical but faithful sort of farewell characters tend to have in these sort of war films, where it's like he says something great like just please keep your head down tomorrow, and he's like, well, I've got a terrible shot, you don't need to worry. And it's
heavy. It's so heavy, and it's also so humbling. They have this this moment of just, well, we're just here doing our job the same as you guys. We are just trying to see ourselves through to the next day the same as you. And I think it's funny you actually mentioned the football game, because when I was watching it yesterday, I was like, this is very similar to the story of the football match, and it's that same sort of level of camaraderie and humanity, and let's just get this horse out, because otherwise it's just going to get killed. So let's just free him if we can, and then go back to. I really like the moment where I can't remember the British actor's name in this scene. I really like him. I've seen him in a few things.
Is it Toby Kebbell?
Yes, maybe.
I might be. I know he's in this. He's called the character Colin, but I just don't know if it's him. But Toby Kebbell, I love because he's played Cobra in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I'm just going to throw that on.
Yeah, of course.
And Dr. Doom in Fant Four Stick, who was actually okay in that film. He's one of the few things.
He's also in A Monster Calls, which is also an absolutely brilliant film. But he says to the German soldier, "What's it like in your trench?" And I just love that it's like, "How you guys all doing? Everything all right?" It's just such a British way, And I just think, this is obviously the most powerful and the most poignant scene in the film. I think it's quite breathtaking, really.
And kind of going what she says, well, like with it being like for young adults, maybe children's book. Again, I'm not familiar with the source material, but as a viewer, there's this amazing thing like with the younger folk today, and so I think our generation we've grown up in very different circumstances to obviously the generations above us, and will be different to the generations below. But I certainly feel that younger people today are far more intelligent than they're given credit for. Yes, you'll get stupid people like every single generation that grow up, but with the state of the internet, for what people can research, people can find out. As far as progression goes, there's a lot more of it, and certainly how I've always took upon with this sort of war stuff is that when I was like 15, 16 studying it, researching it, to me it was like, what the hell? Like, why did all this need to happen? And that was always my logic when I was younger. Whereas obviously the generations above us, they had direct relatives that would have fought in those, that were active in those. And it's completely understandable that so many different generations have different thoughts. But it's a moment like these when you just have to strip it down to its mechanics. It's just two people that don't know each other, that's got no reason to dislike one another. It's following orders. And it's such an important scene, because I've always had this phrase that history books are written by winners most of the time. And I'm not talking morals. I'm not talking who's right and who's wrong. I'm saying that historical texts are written by the people that win. And it's amazing. Again, now we have these databases like the internet where you can research. Even the Germans who have compulsory teaching on students about what the Nazis did in that country, they're not hiding from their history. The same can't be said about every country in the world. A lot of countries don't. That's big countries as well, not just ours. And it's really interesting with this, again, is that younger people can look at this and realize there are two sides to every story. And, the German soldiers, they were just following their orders to go to war, and they just happened to lose that war. Obviously, World War II, very different story.
Yeah, of course.
But that came from a disgruntled loser of World War One. But I won't say any more than that. Sorry, I don't want to do the whole history thing again. Do you want to talk, before we get to John Williams, is there any other characters story I want to speak about? Maybe the horse getting back to him at the end. I don't want to.
The only other really touching moment I found was I can't remember the character's name, but he's the son, David Thewlis's son. He kind of he's obviously in the story right at the beginning, but then he comes back, he comes full circle, and him and Albert cross paths again in the trenches. And I just think that's quite that's quite a powerful moment as well. And they kind of all of a sudden, when they were, he thought he was leagues above Albert. When they were back home, all of a sudden they're kind of balanced out and
Two
in the
boys
same
from
situation.
It's not two boys from Bristol. Where was their unit based? I can't remember. Was it Bristol? Plymouth, something like that. It is, and the things of war is so regional that if anyone isn't familiar, that certainly the World Wars, you're all regimented based on your locations where you were.
Yeah.
Everyone knew someone, and I think that even the gas scene is such like a devastating small moment of when he knows it goes off, but he knows he can't do anything about it, and you just get that subtle weight.
Acceptance, yeah,
and it's horrifying. And if you are familiar, and for a younger viewer at home, they might not think about it, which is fine, and they'll hit an age where they maybe see it again or learn, what that sort of thing did do. Chemical warfare, again, that's a big part of World War I, and it is devastating. And again, the whole purpose of this film is it's seeing the monstrosities that follow the horse, that when you're following it, and the fact it does go back to be bought, to be saved. You get the amazing scene of the grandfather character who says, if you bid 100, I'm going to bid 150.
Yeah,
you bid 150, I'm going to bid 200.
Yeah,
it's such a great moment because without that story arc to me just doesn't work in the middle. Yes, it would have been like, oh, here's like some innocent bystander story segment, but the fact it's so important to how the film finishes.
Yeah,
I think it's such a wonderful moment, and even with the military saying, "Let's kill the horse, let's leave it," the fact that they all double down, they chip in. I think it's just one of those like heart-lifting scenes, and you just don't get it much in cinema anymore, do you? Especially in, I'm gonna just say it. If Warhorse was written today, not by Michael Morpurgo, if this concept was done today, the horse ain't making it out past the last chapter.
No.
And it's not more of a status about like the society of it. It's none of that. It's just modern audiences, modern textbooks, all that sort of stuff. It's just different now. It's all programmed differently, and it's like Marley and Me. Like the one thing before you ever watched it is that the dog's gonna die at the end of the film. And I think I probably thought it would have happened the first time I saw Warhorse. I was probably surprised it didn't, but I just think it's such a powerful meaning that we just get this story that comes full circle. It's truly amazing where it ends.
Yeah, I agree.
So we're going to move from that. I know we've gone over an hour, which has already surprised myself. I'm not going to lie. I'm just trying to avoid saying it's like a history lesson from school. Let's talk John Williams, the legend that we speak about a lot, and he's breaking new ground for this. So he went in meta for research to Warhorse. He basically like just would go to stables and spend all day with horses, and he would look at horses. And he compared his score to this film, not recording a score for a film, but a concert for horses, which is really like surprised me. Like it's an incredible way of him approaching it, but he kind of speaks about how different horses have their moments, but you're always following the different versions. I was a bit, again, I'm just sort of going with my research from yesterday. It probably sounds far more better than how I've just said it, but I thought his score was great in this film. I don't want to say I didn't notice it. That's disrespectful. I think it accompanied the film perfectly. But I couldn't really list you a theme. But the thing is, what I've grown to accept over the sort of just my life listening to soundtracks, just because you might not have a catchy theme, a catchy moment, it doesn't discredit the score. Some people think a good score has to be memorable with tracks A, B, C. But it's about the experience of viewing something for the first time. And for this film, John Williams just gets it. That everything is in place to perfection. It's Spielberg, it's war, it's the right type of score for it. There's nothing bombastic, nothing brass. It's just this beautiful performance. And reading that sort of concert comment really opened my eyes to the approaches, because it actually makes sense. I don't know if that's me stretching a bit. How was it for you?
Yeah, I think it's the same. It kind of complements the film in the same way as the cinematography does, in the same way that the performances do. It's just another seed that kind of like adds to this whole thing. And to be honest, this film wouldn't have made sense having anyone else do the music. It's a John Williams film. Makes sense to me.
And he was nominated for an Oscar for this score. And in a crazy moment, he had 2 Oscar nominations for 2 Spielberg films that came out in the space of 2 months. Tintin.
Did he win either of them?
No, unfortunately not. That's a shame.
That's a shame.
But that's that's just, I mean, to have 2 films out in the space of 2 months, like, you know, normally, oh yeah, he does 2 a year, that's great. 2 in 2 months, that's insane. And the fact, again, like we'll talk about with the Post compared to Ready Player One down the line, it's like he just goes and makes this film whilst he's waiting for another to finish. I'd say this is better than the Post. Very different films though. But it's just amazing. And looking at the legacy of this film, it came out, its worldwide gross was 180 mil for 70 mil budget. That's actually a lot less than I thought it would be. But when you take it into context, at the time, this was the highest grossing World War One film. I don't really think it's an achievement to be called that because there's probably so few. But I think for what to me is a British film, that's a pretty decent number, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
And what I'm kind of annoyed by, I don't want to get into a Fabelmans thing, but you might be in the same vein as me. We know in the UK that British BAFTA films always get released here in the January, February time, and America will be December because the different awards have different runs. I'm just gonna say it sounds a bit gammony, but I was kind of gutted to read that the world premiere was in New York at the New York Theatre, and it's such a minor thing because it was a royal red carpet here. William and Kate went. It's so strange that this just didn't have a massive world premiere here. Again, it's minor, it's irrelevant. Just does that sound strange to you? Like knowing this was elsewhere first, it doesn't mean anything.
I'm quite surprised by that. I think it probably would have made sense for it to have a London premiere, but I mean, never mind.
Yeah, it did eventually.
Just a long time ago.
That's just like me, sort of like just moaning when I don't really need to moan. And Oscars wise, it was nominated for 6. Nominated for Best Picture, Best Production Design, Best Cinematography, Score, and both Sound Editing and Mixing. Didn't win any. I think 8 nominations total across this, and Tintin didn't win any. It was like not a record, but it was apparently the second time in Spielberg's career 2 films in the same year was nominated and didn't win. It's such a stupid statistic. I don't care.
That's not even a real statistic. It's just a fact.
I think it's only because Jurassic Park and Schindler's were the same year they suddenly tried to make it a thing about his films going at one another. But moving off all of that, we normally speak about how a film is perceived today. I'm going to be blunt. I don't have an awful lot to say, mainly because every single person I have spoke to about this film has absolutely loved it. But I'm also going to say it's a film that, this sounds strange, I feel it's ingrained in British culture that most people I know have seen War Horse, but like me, they would have seen it once before. It's a very interesting one. Does that sound a bit strange to you? Like, I'm kind of, what are your thoughts? Like, have you seen this many times over the years, or do you have people that ever bring it up to you in conversation? It's a very odd one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's either that people have seen it and liked it or not seen it. Like, it's kind of not really that well circulated in our sort of viewing. Oh, that was a weird sentence, but I know what I mean. I've only seen it 3 times. I think the first release, when I first got it on Blu-ray, which I think was when it came out, and then yesterday. So, but I think people who have seen it have liked it from what I've heard. But I do also know a lot of people that haven't seen it. So I think it's just one of those ones that maybe slipped under the radar a little bit. Yeah,
definitely. And I think without sort of, I'm not judging Spielberg's other work, but a lot of people seem to dismiss his more, I don't want to say recent films, that like post Crystal Skull up to maybe what will be West Side last year and Fabelmans this year. A lot of people dismiss a lot of those films he did, and I'm like,
for me, it's kind of similar to Amistad in the way that this film should have been massive and should have been, core viewing for so many people, but maybe wasn't for whatever reason. I don't know. I think it has the same thing for me with that one.
I think his Oscar is pretty awkward. I'm not going to read out all 10, but it's the year that the artist won. And just looking at again, it's such a cliche. Oh, the Oscars should be done like 10 years later. I hate that so much because the Oscars are contextual. They always will be. But it is one of the ones you look back and think, not how didn't this win? Because I don't think it's as black and white as other ones. But in the modern era of 10 nominees, up to 10 nominees, sorry, I know it's 10 now officially. It is that, why wasn't one of their heavyweights? Like, when I remember, because it's around the time I'm getting to Oscar, this wasn't even the heavyweight. This was like, it's nominated. It's not going to win.
Yeah. It's just taking one of the slots.
Yeah, and it's strange because I feel that it's better than most of them on there. And is it because it's Steven Spielberg and he's set this standard that's been so high for so many decades? everyone has to compare his films against himself, and I think it's unfair on this because this is better than what most directors could do in their lifetime, and I've said that a lot across the series. But segueing from that point, I'm just going to very quickly ask you before we get to the final thoughts. Favorite scene or best scene, maybe? I know you mentioned.
Oh, I think those are two different things. I think the best scene is the barbed wire. I think that's the most sort of like powerful and poignant scene in the whole film. My favourite scene is when Joey first pulls that plough. I think that's the most sort of like powerful moment for me. It's the sort of like the birth of this great big story. It's the sort of like the first time we really see them both work together as a team, and their friendship and their loyalty to each other. I really love that. And actually, it's often quoted in my house. Walk on, Joey, walk on. It's just so powerful.
It reminds me of like Samwise Gamgee. Like
it's the same accent.
That would be the voice. Yeah.
West Country accent.
It's that's great. Favorite scene. Sorry, not to put you on the spot again.
Yeah. So the
oh no, sorry, ignore me. Best barbed wire. Favorite pulling.
Yeah.
I think I'm almost in similar vein. If I'm being honest, I think the best scene I'll put the best scene as my favorite, more so because I'm a bit of like a war weirdo, but the whole No Man's Land sequence. No Man's Land is such a difficult thing for anybody to shoot. It doesn't matter what format, what decade, what year, what you're trying to do. To have a real horse doing that, I think, and when it's on the floor, obviously it's not a real horse. It's not animatronic at that point, but again, it's not CGI. It's them doing it.
That's actually happening, and that really changes the way the actors act in the scene as well. It gives them a real sense of realism and what the threat really is there.
It's just an incredible feat of filmmaking that I think is something just no one speaks about. So I'm glad we've been able to at least shed some light on it. And kind of with that in mind, heading to my final thoughts on this film. I mean, I enjoyed it yesterday. I think this discussion sort of pushed it higher up in my estimations because I've been thinking about this film a lot today, and I think the impact that this film had, I've not felt in quite a while with some of the Spielberg films that, you know, when we've looked at his like mid-noughties films, so much of his work is impacted from 9/11, which is completely understandable. That has revolutionized not just filmmaking, but that's revolutionized just the world in the sort of 20 plus years that's been around now. But it feels like Spielberg's going back to what is like a Spielbergian film. It's such a strange term, but it is that, you know, lead character, this time a horse against all odds, the journey, the characters, the story. It's kind of like Empire of the Sun, but Christian Bale's become a horse, actually, now I think about it. But I think this is a wonderful film. I don't want to say it's underrated because I think everybody that's seen it probably thinks it's great. I think it's just one that hasn't been seen by many. And I think anyone that does see it would probably know this is a pretty damn fantastic film, and it's probably, is it the best World War I film? It's probably one of the two that springs to my mind. Not that it's really an achievement for that.
It's hard to for anything to beat 1917 in my opinion, but it's definitely up there. So I think it's up there with one of the best war films. You know, I think it's such a different angle to look at war and look at the effects of war, and I think I just love it. I really love it. I might not have seen it that many times, but the times I have watched it, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think if you haven't seen it, go and find it and watch it, and put your phone away and shut the curtains and get a big bowl of popcorn and just really lose yourself in it, because it really is just such a beautiful film, so beautifully made. No,
definitely. Very touching words. And I think I can't end it better than that. So that's going to do it for our review on War. So please do comment your thoughts below. This has been an amazing discussion. Thank you, Charlie, for coming on for this night. It's been amazing.
Pleasure.
And everybody at home, if you've enjoyed this video, comment your thoughts. Let us know your thoughts on Warhorse. I'm really curious to hear about them. Maybe everyone's read this text differently. Maybe they're familiar with the war, the behind the scenes, the book. As we said, we want to hear them. So please comment them. We love getting involved with that sort of stuff. And if you're a fan of Steven Spielberg, this is the place to be. Of course, next up, we have Lincoln, which is going to start Tuesday, the 11th of October. That is going to be one I've never seen, that film. And not only do I get to cross off a new Steven Spielberg film, I get to cross off an Adam Driver film I've not seen. So I'll be talking about that as well.
Adam Driver is in Lincoln?
I believe it's his third or fourth film he's ever in. Probably a really small role.
Yeah.
But
Just
Adam
a
Driver
walk
is in
on.
Lincoln. Yeah, I've been waiting a long time to see this. And I've never seen the film, so I'm very curious. I very much enjoyed Daniel Day-Lewis, and one of the biggest Oscar upsets of all time, I can remember. So do join us for that. And if we're looking also at what's coming up in the Steven Spielberg retrospective, not only do we have Lincoln, we've also got Bridge of Spies, the BFG, the Posts. We're getting closer and closer and closer to modern day. With those in mind, I think it's fair for us just to say after that we've then got Ready Player One and West Side Story. That we don't have that many left. It's crazy how quickly this series is going. I know, as I said, we're batch recording. I know a lot of people involved in this, but it's genuinely flying by now. And it's going to be quite weird as we draw nearer to the end, as we get closer to that big top 10 video. It's going to be very weird to say goodbye to the series because it's sort of been a stalwart of 2022 for me. But with that in mind, Charlie, I'm going to hand over to you. I mentioned you finished your dissertation. You're now getting the chance to watch a lot. You're getting a chance to watch a lot of new films as well. I've got your Twitter scrolling on the screen at Funny Old World X.
Yeah.
Are you up to anything else? I mean, pre-recording this, we know what starts tomorrow.
I mean, I'm probably getting myself really stressed out about everything that we're going to have to watch over the next 2 weeks. So, yeah, I'll be at the film festival, be covering it for work, which is exciting. And I really, really, really cannot wait to get super stuck in this year. Like, I just feel like I don't need sleep, I don't need food, I just need films, and I'll be happy.
Definitely. It'll be exciting to see there. A lot of others, recognisable faces. Me and Tate will both be there. We might as well start plugging it. Then the Film Festival 2022, the Matilda world premiere is tomorrow. Again, we're pre-recording this in, it's not even mid-September yet. We'll have a lot of plans. We'll have details. If we're lucky, we might even have some interviews, some red carpet footage. But there's a lot of films for us to watch. It's got a packed schedule. And yes, there's no Fabelmans, as I think I made a terrible joke on a recent episode that he'll either be there and I'll be buzzing or I won't and I'll be gutted. But it's got a very stellar lineup, so I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, we'll be there from tomorrow. We'll have reviews up on the channel as and when across the following 10 days, maybe past that. Depends how many films we get to see. But obviously, if you've followed our channel before, you'll know that it's one of the big things we do, and that is why we're batch recording this so far in advance. And as well as the London Film Festival, we've also got Andor spoiler discussions, which are happening every Wednesday, and also at the time of recording, we haven't seen anything yet. It's not the 21st of September yet, but rest assured, every Wednesday there'll be a spoiler discussion. I mentioned there's the festival. There may be some people you recognise that will be hosting a video for the first ever time. Not hard to guess who that probably will be.
It's not me.
No, it's not. Of course, it's Dave. I say this, and Dave won't be on tomorrow.
Of course, it's Dave.
But yeah, there's going to be a lot of Star Wars stuff every Wednesday night. We've got it covered for Andor. I hope the series is great at the point in the series going up. I think it will be up to episode 5 or 6. I don't know. We're so far away at the moment. It's hard to tell. But Andor reviews every Wednesday. Please do get involved. And if you want to find out about other videos, other reviews, announcements, streams, all that kind of stuff, Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy, Redbubble, where you can pick up merch in the description below. I'm not going to wear our merch at a festival. That would look ridiculous. And I say this, and Tate's probably done it without me making a dig. Why is he saying that?
Tate's always wearing the merch.
Yeah, he reps the merch.
He's always on brand.
I just keep wearing the same sort of clothes because I don't know why. It's just easier for me. But as we said, this has been an amazing discussion. I know we've been going for almost an hour and a half. I said, Charlie, once more, thank you for jumping on tonight. I don't think I missed anything else off. So, as we said, we'll see you all next week for Lincoln. That will also be pre-recorded and a lot of other stuff on our social media. So we hope you enjoy this video. We hope you will enjoy the film festival and whatever videos will come out between now and then. Take care, and we'll see you then.